Eric, I know that we just heard word from NHL and NHL PR. What can you tell us on the latest on the Habs and their COVID protocols?
Well, what the NHL has announced is that games will be postponed through Sunday, and that means that 2 games against the Edmonton Oilers and 1 against the Ottawa Senators, and Monday's game as well, which was postponed, means that 4 games for the Montreal Canadiens will need to be rescheduled. But outside the games is the concern, obviously, for the players involved. And the 2 players that were put on the protocol list initially were Yoel Armia and Jesperi Kotkaniemi. If one or both have tested positive for COVID, then obviously I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of us here at Sportsnet in wishing them well.
Yeah, without a doubt. And we always walk this balance or this tightrope of understanding, and I hope we can all start with that the health and safety of all these players is paramount. And whenever we're talking about this, we understand that fans want to know what this means to their favorite team or the team playing the team that is affected. So let's just say first and foremost what Eric just said, and I will echo it. If there are positives, let's hope that they are healthy and we can move on and have the conversation about what this means. Because for the Edmonton Oilers, I mean, they were staying in town till it seemed like Friday, Eric. Do we know anything about how this changes what they've been doing along the way?
I don't believe it does at all. Otherwise, I think the release would have included them, but I don't want to speak too soon on that. Obviously, it just came out as we were holding to get on air together. Yeah. And, their next game obviously would be Saturday against Toronto. And if that goes ahead as scheduled, then I would assume that nobody's affected there. On the Montreal side of things, I think a lot of people are going to be wondering how this got sorted out with only 2 players, because it's still in that release mentioned that they're being shut down through the end of the week because of 2 players being on the list. So we know that the 2 players were Yoel Armia and Jesperi Kotkaniemi. Another thing that we know, which I broke down in my column at sportsnet.ca last night, is that those 2 players were participating in Montreal's morning skate yesterday. So I think one of the reasons that they would have to go to such an extreme measure as canceling games or postponing them for that matter would be that these guys were in close contact with their teammates and the coaching staff and potentially the PR staff. So, these are things that you like to see the NHL erring on the side of caution. They're obviously in touch with local authorities, medical authorities, the team itself. I can say this, the Canadiens have had absolutely rigid protocols in terms of dealing with COVID and how to keep it out of their system. And we've seen throughout Canada that all the teams have. And, the only time that we had a real scare outside of the preseason and the situation with Jordy Ben and JT Miller was in Edmonton with Jesse Puljujarvi coming to Montreal and having a false positive. So, and I also reported that Tyler Toffoli had a false positive upon landing in Montreal and coming from LA. So those things do happen. It seems clear in this case that there wasn't a false positive between one of these 2 guys. Otherwise, I'd have a hard time believing that they'd be shutting things down for a week.
Listen, I understand we're putting you in a difficult situation because we are going live to air just as this news is breaking. But I know that the Habs also went through their testing earlier today, or I am to believe that they went through their testing earlier today, and that we don't have the results. Is this just to allow also the NHL to go through those, make sure the results are there, and then do the proper contact tracing?
I do believe the results are in, Tim. I just don't think that they've been reported by the National Hockey League. Right. They have to be reported to the National Hockey League by 5. And for people that want to know about the process here, every day since January 2nd, the Canadiens and every other team in the NHL have been tested every single morning, including on off days. So Sunday, the Canadiens had a day off. They had to go to the practice facility and get tested. Family members for everyone in the team, the staff, the administration, are tested twice a week. So the testing is very rigorous, but it is the PCR test, and there are hours of lag between taking the test and receiving the results. The Canadiens got tested this morning. They received their results somewhere around 4 p.m. Eastern, unless there was some delays there. And if there were, it could be part of the reason why it still says to be announced in terms of who's on the list. But the fact that the NHL put this release out and continued to say that there's only 2 players that are the reasons why they're shutting this down and in close contact and all that. And I have to reread the release because I only read it quickly once before we jumped on together here. But, it would indicate that the results are in for the day and they just haven't been announced yet.
So this is 3 games for the Habs if we're going through March 28th.
Yes, and a fourth, including yesterday's that got postponed.
Eric Engels in Montreal. Do we dare talk about what this means to this team? Because it was already a team kind of on the hot seat, and I mentioned it in our roundtable about Marc Bergevin, expecting a lot of things from this team. And as we've seen in other sports, when COVID hits a squad, it can definitely change the trajectory of a team. The Toronto Raptors went through it, and they're still recovering from it. They've lost now 9 straight. Does this give Marc Bergevin a bit of a reprieve? Is he under pressure in the market right now, regardless of COVID?
I think less to do with Marc Bergevin. I'm thinking about the immediate ramifications of what these postponements mean and what it could mean. The very first thing that comes to mind is, will this spread through the team? If somebody has in fact tested positive for the virus, that's the most immediate concern. The lag in the schedule and the fact that there's only basically a week to make up games after the schedule ends May 8th is another concern. Where the Canadiens find themselves, they've been in a playoff spot wire to wire, basically. Haven't fallen out. They even gained ground while they were idle on Monday with the Flames and Canucks losing games. Again, I'll state what I said off the top. Obviously, we want to know all the different implications from a playing standpoint. Right now, health is the primary concern for these players. We know that you look across the league, you look across the world and what's happened, you obviously have to be concerned about that. You look across the league and a guy like Rasmus Ristolainen in Buffalo, who talked about a very serious case of COVID and suffering the effects from that for a long time and coming back to play for Buffalo. So, these are the things that immediately come into my mind, and much less so, and not out of disrespect for your question, because it's a legitimate question, much
Understood.
more so than the security of Marc Bergevin right now. Like I said, the Canadiens have been wire to wire in a playoff spot, and I don't anticipate this would change much unless obviously there's a serious contagion and spread throughout the team.
Understood. Eric, as always, thank you for doing this. Appreciate it, and appreciate the spot that you're in as the breaking news hit just before we came on the air.
Yeah, let's hope for better news.
Yes.